is now streaming. It must be on
Hey. Okay.
Kelly's
Hi,
page.
yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kelly McCauley, Member of Parliament, Edmonton West. With me, I have my colleague from Edmonton Centre, James Cummings, and our colleague from Northwest Alberta, Peace River, Westlock. It's Arnold Viersen, our Member of Parliament. I'm glad you could join us today, Arnold, and anyone tuning in. I wanted to bring Arnold aboard to discuss with us all the incredible work that he's been doing on fighting human trafficking in Canada. Arnold, I'm very proud of him. He has been the strongest, loudest voice in the entire House of Commons on this issue on protecting young people, protecting women, protecting Indigenous from the scourge of human trafficking, and also his work against violent pornography. So welcome, Arnold, and welcome, James Cummings.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Kelly, for putting this on. And thanks, Arnold, for taking the time today to be able to talk about a topic that I know you've been working your butt off on. And I'm not sure that Canadians understand and local constituents understand how hard you've been working on this issue. So very much appreciated. This is one of these issues that should go across party lines because it's time that we did the right thing. So looking forward to hearing from Arnold today and having him answer a few questions that you might have as we deal with what is a horrific problem in Canada. So I think, Arnold, it's over to you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, guys.
Sorry, Arnold, before you start, if anyone has any questions for Arnold or for us, just put them in comments and we will address them as we can. Now, a couple times during our broadcast, we're going to have to interrupt for votes. We're voting on C7 today, which is the MAID, the assisted medical assistance in dying. We have a new electronic app where we can vote virtually over our iPhones. We'll let you know when we're have to stop for a few moments to do the voting. But Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, guys, for putting this on and hosting this tonight. I just want to point out to everybody, I'm wearing a hat because earlier James was complaining that my baldness was wrecking his eyes. So I normally don't wear a hat on my Zoom meeting, but tonight, for the sake of James's eyes, I'll put my hat on. It's not a problem at all, James. And Kelly, Kelly and I got elected together back in 2015, and I don't know if Kelly remembers this, but the first time I met Kelly was at Link Byfield's funeral. Actually, I think I don't know if we sat by each other or we ended up chatting for a while outside the door. That was just before I won. Well, just before. I think that was almost 6 months before I won the nomination back then. But yeah, Kelly, it's been a pleasure to serve with you since 2015. And then James Cummings, I think you ran in that election as well. I remember meeting you at the big rally at the drill bit factory there in Edmonton, and with the blue walls everywhere. And you had your son there. May he rest in peace. That was. But so it took James 2 tries, and now he's in Parliament with us as well. So it's a real honor and privilege to work with these guys. On the human trafficking front, I've been involved now. Well, I don't know if most folks know this, but when we get elected into Parliament, when there's a new Parliament, there's kind of a lottery system for our private members' bills. And so at the beginning of the Parliament, they pull our names out of a hat and they give us each a number. I think this Parliament I got like number 174. Kelly, I don't know what number you got, but
I think 238.
238. So I beat you in that.
If there's not an election for 15 years, I might be able to table.
Yeah. So getting a private member's spot that's usable is kind of a once in a career thing, I think. So James, I don't know, what was your number?
I was I hesitant to tell you this, but as a new member of Parliament, I was number 2.
Oh. Nice.
And my bill that I put forward was the repeal of what would be known as Bill C-48, which is the tanker ban off the West Coast.
Perfect.
And was not successful with that bill, but I think we tried to get the point across that natural resources are an important part of the economy for Canada and for particularly for our province.
Okay. Yeah, so I was picked number 36 in the first parliament. So, um, James, I'm sure that came as a massive surprise to you, because I know when I got chosen number 36, let me tell you, when I got elected, I was happy to be part of a Stephen Harper government. That's what I was shooting for. We never made government, but private members' bills were not something that I thought about at all before getting elected. And so then I got chosen number 36, and I just remember, like, what do I do with this? This is like the like huge opportunity, and the sky's the limit. What do you do, right? So, and that's I don't know if that was your thing as well, James, or not, but
Yeah, the reaction from a new MP was, "Oh no." So, and there's lots of issues, but as you're probably going to talk about, Arnold, that most private member bills never make it to legislation, and particularly in a minority parliament where likely we're going to have another election soon, maybe
Mhm.
even in June. And so I wanted really to make a statement about something that I thought was important for Alberta. Yeah, did I know that it probably wouldn't pass? Yeah, but is it an important issue that the statement had to be made? I do think so. So
Mhm. Yeah, so that's so it was a completely different scenario back in 2015. Trudeau had a majority. We were looking at 4 years regardless. And so, and being number 36, I was up in, what is it? I think they released them kind of 15 at a time. So I was up in the third tranche. So it gave me about 6 months to get organized. Yeah, I had a long list of items, and many people come to you too when you have a number low on the list. You probably had the same thing, James, pitching you with ideas. And so, but I remember about a year after my daughter was born, there was the Rotea Parsons case, and I don't know if you guys remember that. It was national news for quite a while. She was a 17-year-old girl that committed suicide, but when she was 14, she'd been raped at a party, and the folks that did that were um, 6 young men, and they posted this on the internet. They posted it on their Facebook pages, like as like brag material. And I just remember being like shocked at like the horrificness of it, but also the fact that like these boys thought it was so normal that they would brag about it, right? They would put it on their Facebook page and say, "Hey, look what we did," kind of thing, right? Like I do that with my Jeep and things like that. I like, "Hey, check out my cool Jeep" and stuff, right? But they put this up. Like, why did they think that this was normal? And so that led me to my motion M47, which is what I eventually came to a conclusion on what I was going to do it on. And that was the study of the impacts of online sexually degrading material. And that motion passed unanimously through the House of Commons back in 2017, and it led to a health committee study. And that led me to the whole world of the pornography and human trafficking, how they overlap, and what the impacts are on Canadian society. And I think the Rotea Parsons case is a clear kind of story of the impacts. Is that when this kind of content is being consumed on a weekly basis, it's educating our children on what they think is normal. And so that's where M47 came out of. Now, after M47 passed and the committee study happened and all that, then it kind of, the study was submitted in the House of Commons like they usually are. I had this big network of people from across the country who had supported M47, and they were all looking to me like, what's next, Arnold? Like, what are you gonna, like, we helped you with this. How can we help you with the next thing? And so we worked on bringing forward. One of the things I found that all the groups were united on was the area of human trafficking. Now, human trafficking is a heinous crime that's growing in Canada. It's happening within 10 blocks of where you live, anywhere in Canada. This isn't just a thing that happens in Montreal or in the city centers. Up in the northern part of my riding, Lacrete, Alberta, we had a human trafficking case just last year. So it's happening clear across Canada, and it can happen to anybody. You can be trafficked for all kinds of reasons. And so that's where I've moved towards, is combating human trafficking. Folks always ask me, Arnold, like, what's one thing that I can do to prevent human trafficking from happening? And I say to just quit looking at porn on the internet. That's probably the simplest the way to do it, because many of these girls that are being filmed, they're not there because they chose to be. They're there because somebody's forcing them to be, particularly when it comes to the free tube sites. We know that.
Arnold, let me interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
When we talk about human trafficking, a lot
Mhm.
of the feedback I get is the perception is it's women and young men being smuggled into the country
Mhm.
or brought in, and we see that in Hollywood type TV shows.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
that's not necessarily the case.
Not at all. That's absolutely not the case. In Canada, human trafficking. So human trafficking, there's kind of like two big areas of it. There's like the labor trafficking and then the sex trafficking side of it. And in Canada, we know that 93% of the victims of human trafficking are victims that are Canadian, and or they're either Canadian or permanent residents, and it's happening within Canada. It's not cross-border. In fact, it appears that our border mechanisms are strong, like quite strong, and so crossing the border is where you're likely to get caught if you're trafficking somebody. And so it's not 93% of our trafficking victims are Canadian, and even that's what the stat is, and even the 7% that aren't Canadian um, already came here on like legal pretense and then get trafficked while they're here. So that's the thing. The other thing we know about it is that the vast majority of them are young and female, and we know that 50% of the human trafficking victims in the country are Indigenous, they're First Nations. So that is a major issue. Labor trafficking is less common than sex trafficking, but we know that in the sex trafficking world, most of the victims of sex trafficking are underage. They're mid-teenage, kind of, and they're forced into prostitution before they're of age, like 18. So those are kind of like the overarching stats. And people are, definitely always shocked to see that, because they typically think, oh, this is like a sea can full of people coming in from on the back of a truck and stuff like that.
Hollywood
Yeah,
show.
yeah, and
That's the case.
that.
It's a Canadian
Like
problem.
it's definitely that happens, but it's like the very, very small minority of the human trafficking cases. So most of the victims do end up in our major metropolitan areas, but like it doesn't mean you. Many of the victims come, like I said before, the victims come from all over the place, and it's it can affect anyone, any walk of life. I don't know. It was about 3 years back. I don't know if you remember the case. There was a case where there was a gal that was working in Fort McMurray, and then she was murdered in Calgary, and then her 3-year-old daughter they found her murdered down in Vauxhall, and then they arrested the guy that murdered them both at the border. They found him trying to get across the border. He was a member of North Preston's Finest, which is a human trafficking ring out of Nova Scotia, a notorious human trafficking ring. And
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
This is the one I recall a Maclean's magazine article about this gang.
Mm-hmm.
It really sets off. It's a Halifax-based gang, but they've got links.
They traffic girls across the country.
Across the entire country. They've got pipelines across the entire country to groom and then get women out.
Yeah, and so they were trafficking her in Fort McMurray, and she managed to escape from Fort McMurray, and then basically he was just their cleanup dude, hitman basically. So that was that case for Albertans anyways might be something that they remember. And the news never really touched on the whole human trafficking part of it. It was the horrific murder case of a mother and a daughter, but the trafficking piece and the North Preston's Finest piece weren't necessarily part of the news. But that's what a severe case of human trafficking would look like from a police perspective. So,
Arnold, before you leave that, why
yeah.
is it that this doesn't the story behind the story isn't told as well, and people realize that this is a significant issue? I think you're right. They'll hear about the crimes committed, but not the background of the trafficking.
Yeah, because it's a more complicated story to tell. I think that's probably the reality, right? The girl getting murdered in Calgary, having taken a job in Fort McMurray, and her missing daughter. Like there was an Amber Alert about the missing daughter, and then they found her dead near Vauxhall, I think. But it's a more complicated story to tell, right? I think that's just purely the case. So, and like I guess since then, like things like those things do start drawing awareness. Like since that time, I think that was like probably 4 years ago now. There's been more and more awareness around human trafficking, and that it has a Canadian face, and that keep your eyes peeled, and it's happening within 10 blocks of where you live. One of the reasons why it is as big of a problem as it is because the average victim of human trafficking makes for their trafficker nearly $300,000 a year, right? So it's a massive business, and that it's lucrative, and so that's where we're at with it. So that's the $300,000 a year is what we're dealing with, and many traffickers don't traffic just one girl. That's a whole nother story. The Liberals have reduced the or removed in Bill C-75 in the last parliament. They removed the consecutive sentencing. So when we were in power, we brought in anti-trafficking laws, and one of the things was that if you trafficked one girl, it was 10 years. If you trafficked two, it was 20. If you trafficked three, it was 30. And the Liberals have removed that now. So now you traffic one or you traffic 10, it's 10 years.
Yeah, and that's really an indefensible. I know a lot of the changes the government is trying to make is, reduce overrepresentation of certain demographics in the prison, but ostensibly for nonviolent crimes, it's nonsensical and indefensible to be reducing penalties for such horrific crimes as human trafficking.
Yeah. And so like the minimum sentence on it's 10 years. They often get double time for time served before they're convicted, right? So I over and over again, I hear of cases where the trafficker is in jail for less time than he trafficked the girl, right?
Wow.
That's quite common. He traffics a girl for 3 years, and he's in prison for a year and a half. The other major issue is around bail. So we've been working. We have, I think it's our colleague from, just forgetting, Colin Carey. Where is he from? Oshawa. He's put forward a bill around the Palermo Protocol and bringing back the consecutive sentencing. We also are looking at a bill for bail, reverse onus on the bail, because that's a real problem as well. Is that girl finally steps forward and says, hey, this guy's trafficking me. They finally get the whole case organized. They arrest the guy, and 24 hours after his arrest, he's back out on bail, and he's standing in the girl's driveway, signaling to her that she's dead meat, right? That's a major challenge that we have with the trafficking. And yeah, the minimum sentencing continues to be a challenge around human trafficking as well. The courts don't seem to enforce the 10-year minimum sentence as well as they should. So yeah, that's a real challenge for sure. So Conservatives have a great record on combating human trafficking, starting back in 2011. Our colleague Joy Smith, none of us got the pleasure of serving with her. She retired in the 2015 election.
Joyce is an absolute angel.
Yeah.
Legend.
Yeah. So she really was the driving force behind our Canadian anti-trafficking laws, and also our the Canadian adoption of the equity model coming out of like Sweden around our prostitution laws as well. And so in 2011 we passed the Trafficking in Persons Act. It was kind of a revolutionary thing at the time. And then in 2013 we passed the Pcepa law, which is the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. Both of those build on legislation that has been enacted around the world, specifically in the Nordic countries, and we should be proud as conservatives for our record on that. And then we also launched the first ever national action plan to end human trafficking. That was done in kind of between those two in 2012. And so what it really did was try to coordinate all the police forces across the country, and it built probably the biggest thing that came out of it was this Project Northern Spotlight, where all the police forces across the country would spend a month just trying to clean up all the human trafficking cases. And oftentimes what happened was there multiple jurisdictions were kind of investigating the same case or the same girl, not realizing it, right? And so what they said is, okay, we'll put aside a month of the year, call it Operation Northern Spotlight, and bring together all of the trafficking units, and they would all coordinate or talk with each other, and they would start to like line up the dots. It was extremely successful.
Is it still going on?
No. So it was funded for 4 years. The funding, no, it was renewed once. So it was like 16. The funding expired in 16. So it was not but it did carry on. It carried on for about 2 years after, just because of like the institutional inertia. But yeah, now people move on. They're no longer on the same anti-trafficking units. Most often police officers, you're placed on a unit like that for 2 or 3 years kind of thing. The mental burnout from working in that area is immense. So the police forces just won't let you work on it for more than 3 years kind of thing. And then they say you have to go do something else because you'll go insane, or get really depressed about humanity working in that area. So that's that. It carried on for a couple of years. They still kind of have it on the books and things like that, but the people that were engaged with it at the beginning are no longer there, and so it doesn't have its effect quite the same. We called for continued funding of it back in 2016, 2017, when it was still kind of fresh in everyone's mind. The Liberals never did fund it again. They came out with their own plan, but it hasn't been as nearly as successful or engaged. So there's money behind it, but it's not like a focused push in the same way. They also brought in, they've moved away from kind of enforcement to more community engagement, which is helpful, but community engagement is important, but it's all like you need to have the enforcement piece in order to be effective in any regard. So,
right. Sorry, my phone's buzzing off.
Mm-hmm.
Arnold, tell us about the work you're doing with the APPG.
All right, so that's an interesting one. So the United Kingdom and our Great Britain, or however you want to call it, that big island across the ocean there, they have I guess it's a series of islands. I'll get my geography all your
You
viewers.
give Irish heritage to us. It's just Ireland and the other land.
Oh yeah. You always that's my favorite joke. Is like when you meet some guy with like a thick British accent, you say, "Where are you from?" And then they say, "Well, from Great Britain." And you say, "Where is that?" Right? And they get all offended for some reason. I don't know why, but either way, our mother parliament, if you want to put it that way, they have an all-party group to end human trafficking and modern-day slavery, and so I have a bit of a relationship with a couple of members of that in in the UK, and we thought, well, that would be kind of interesting if we could replicate it here in Canada. So that's what we did. We literally took their constitution, copied and pasted it, changed Great Britain to Canada, and
You're one of the co-chairs?
what's that?
You're one of the co-chairs, right?
Yeah, yeah, and so they're an all-party group.
There's
So
Liberals, there's NDP, there's Bloc, Conservatives, of course.
yep, yeah. So I recruited from the last Parliament Robert Falcon-Ouellette for the Liberals. He was our Liberal co-chair, and then we had Christine Moore from the NDP. She was our NDP co-chair, and Dan Christmas. He was our Independent Senator co-chair. And so with the four of us, we launched the all-party group. Now, one of the things that I didn't think about, and it's kind of just a funny thing, is when we launched the all-party group, I just copied and pasted the constitution from the UK saying like, you know, I did our mother parliament, everything's the same kind of thing. This should all work out. But one of the things I forgot about is the French. So all of our documents are in English, and the French piece is something that, you know, Great Britain doesn't have the bilingualism to deal with. So we've since then we've had to, like, we've got it all in English and in French. And our new co-chairs for this year, so Robert Falcon-Ouellette didn't get reelected, Christine Moore didn't reoffer, and Dan Christmas, his wife actually passed away late last year, and he still has young children at home, and so he just said like, hey, I got to bow out on it. So so now we've got all new co-chairs. I'm still there, but we've got Senator Julie Maville Duchesne. She's our new independent senator co-chair. John McKay is the new Liberal co-chair, and Andriane LaRoche is our Bloc co-chair. So we've gone with the four. Our party our constitution for the all-party group only requires 4 co-chairs. So Heather McPherson is our honorary NDP co-chair, not because mostly just because we have 4 co-chairs in our constitution, and so she helps us out quite a bit as well.
This group is one of the largest parliamentary groups.
That could be. I'm not sure. I haven't checked it out. I want to say it's one of the most successful, but we've pushed forward through the Senate. We've got Bill S-203 and S-213. Bill S-203 is supply chain. S-213 is supply chain reporting. So that calling on the government to have companies report how their supply chains might be affected by human trafficking. This is more like a labor trafficking scenario. Interestingly, Canadian companies are somewhat like quite involved in the human trafficking, and we think, well, that's kind of weird. Like, Canadian companies, we've got good labor standards here in Canada and things like that, and that's true. But we have a very good tax regime when it comes to mining companies, and so many mining companies headquarter themselves in Canada, but are international mining companies, and that's where we actually participate in a bunch of human trafficking. The other areas is like textiles. That's like Bangladesh clothing factories. That's folklore essentially. Like, everybody kind of is familiar with that. And then probably the more recent and gripping stories are about the shrimp boat, the like Costco shrimp boat fiasco. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. So Thailand, there's all these shrimp boats off the coast of Thailand, and 12 to 17-year-old boys are being trafficked onto these boats, and these boats will stay out at sea for 2 years. So they are small, they're relatively small vessels, maybe 70 feet long, and these boys are the labor on these boats, and then a big boat comes by every day and picks up all the shrimp and drops some more food off for them. But yeah, they will be, and this shrimp from these shrimp boats was ending up in Costco. That was a big story about a year ago, and so that's kind of been the motivation for this bill. So that's Bill S-213.
Well, that's great because the Americans, the US has very, very, very strong laws um, to protect their supply lines from use
Yep.
of items of origin from forced labor. We're
Yep.
seeing it in, of course, in China with the Uyghurs and others.
Yep.
They do it. I have to give points to the Americans. They do an incredible job forcing companies to actually backtrack and prove. It's almost like a reverse onus. They have to prove that there is not
Yep.
slave labor using their goods, whereas the Canadian government, it's a self-attestation.
Mm-hmm.
So the company only has to attest hand over heart.
Yeah. Yeah. So the new regime. So interestingly, the government, the Liberals announced this core office is the office of can't remember what the core stands for again, but it's the Office of Corporate Responsibility.
Right.
I'm mixing it up somewhere but and they've got an ombudsman or an ambassador that heads that office. They've given her a budget and no mandate. So she's been operating for almost 2 years now. This bill, we're kind of hoping that the government would just take this bill and turn it into her, like, part of her mandate, but that hasn't happened yet. And so she's been operating for 2 years without a mandate. This bill would require executives, so company executives, to sign on their disclosure, their own signature, and they would be held responsible for with $250,000 fines, personally responsible for false disclosures. So we've got some pushback from the human rights community saying, well, like, this doesn't actually give the workers in other countries workers' rights like they would have in Canada. The unions in particular, that's what they're having to say. But it would ensure that we at least are getting reporting of it, because the unions are saying, well, this company, for example, could just say, well, hey, we're participating in human trafficking in this country, but it's okay because it's legal there, right? And they would not face a fine for that, right? If they disclose it appropriately, if they disclose what's happening in reality, there would not be a fine for participating in human trafficking in a country where it's legal, right? So that's the trouble. But we cannot legislate for another country. That's the reality. But I'm sure that if Costco said, yeah, you know what, we're buying shrimp off this boat here, and we're pretty sure that the kids are being trafficked onto there, but we're going to buy the shrimp anyways, I'm pretty sure that there would be massive public outrage about that, and nobody would be going to the Costco at all anymore. So that's Bill C-213, sponsored by the all-party group, and specifically sponsored by Senator Maville Deschênes in the Senate. And she's also sponsoring Bill S-203, which is a bill to make it so that internet porn companies ensure that children are not viewing their sites, and so it's meaningful age verification. That bill as well, and that bill, I have a petition on my website that you can download and fill out and send into my office, and I'd much appreciate that.
Arnold, how would you, like, meaningful age verification, like how do you execute on that to make sure the words are true, like meaningful?
Yeah. Well, the law is actually pretty clear that you're not allowed to provide sexually explicit content to children. And so folks are always like, well, how would you do that? I said, I don't know. The Pornhub, for example, they claim that they're the most sophisticated and best internet company in the world. If they're bragging about that, surely they can keep kids off their site. And so I've been writing letters to the minister and the prime minister about this as well, just saying, like, hey, this is the law. You're not allowed to provide this to children. We have a similar law when it comes to online gambling or selling of cigarettes or selling of weed. It seems to get enforced on the gambling and cigarette side. How come it's not enforced when it comes to online sexually explicit material to children. So
Yeah.
that's and so that's what this her bill would clarify it somewhat, or just around internet companies, saying that, hey, the law also applies to the internet. So we'll.
Arnold, I've got a question that's come up from someone watching.
Yeah.
How do we get Canada to take PCEPA more seriously?
Pcepa, that's what we call that. So that's the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act. That is an ongoing challenge. So we passed that bill in 2013. Getting police forces to enforce the law has continued to be a challenge. I know through my office, we have got a campaign of every year we write a letter to all the chiefs of police in the country, thanking them for their enforcement of Pcepa. That usually causes them to do like we're enforcing Pcepa, okay, oh yeah, and then because they write me a response, right, and then they that puts it on their radar nonetheless. And so
is it a police chief level issue, or is that the Crown prosecutors
it's
not interested in following up?
It's all of the above. And like in the city of Vancouver, for example, it's a municipal governance issue, right? The city of Vancouver doesn't like the law, and so they just refuse to enforce it. But in other jurisdictions, like in Oshawa, Oshawa has a specific human trafficking task force. I've toured their facility with Colin Carey. We did a ride along with their detectives. They're one of the bright spots in the country in the fact that they check in on hundreds of girls every month and say hey, if somebody's trafficking you, if you're not here of your own volition, here's our number. We'll come and get you. And that's the model. If we could bring that across the country, that would be great. But on the every jurisdiction is doing a little bit different. In Calgary, they have a big anti-trafficking task force there, and they call it Not in My City, and it's headed by country music singer Paul Brandt. And that's a much more private sector initiative. Their biggest partner is the Calgary International Airport, but yeah, that's been very successful to ensure that they're raising awareness for hey, human trafficking is happening within 10 blocks of where you live. Their goal is to set up a center much like the Child Advocacy Center, formerly known as the Sheldon Kennedy Child Advocacy Center, right, where if you rescue a girl from being trafficked, rather than her having to run through all the government agencies independently, they put all the government agencies, so you got the prosecutors and the police force and health and social services and all of them under one roof. And so they all come to the victim rather than the victim having to make appointments and meet these appointments all over the place. And then they also the Child Advocacy Center as well. They have the police detective units also have a floor in that building, and because they're always talking with social services and they're all in the same building and have to walk by each other every day. A lot of the awareness around where if there's a possible victim somewhere just happens fairly organically. So that's where they're trying to go in Calgary. Montreal is kind of seen as a hub for this, and so that the city of Montreal and their police force is real aggressive on the anti-trafficking. But I guess it's 7 years old, the bill now, 8 years old. Maybe as in terms of how it was a fundamental shift in the way we thought about. What's that?
Time for an update.
Well, maybe it's time for an update, but it was a fairly fundamental shift in the way we thought about prostitution. and it may it's starting every year I see it. There's more and more cases being brought to court. There's more and more women getting rescued out of being trafficked, and so I think it's slowly becoming a big part of Canadian society. But yeah, could we do better? 100%, 100%.
Got a couple more questions here that's come up. One, and I'll read them off to you so you don't have to keep interrupting you. What are signs to look for people at risk for being human trafficking? We hear about gangs grooming young women, young men. What are signs for family to look for? Hillary asks, what changes can people make in their lives to avoid supporting products made with human trafficking? That's going to be a bit more difficult. How many men are victims? Why aren't we being represented? And then just comment about Facebook is still allowing children to be exploited on their pages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. And I think, Arnold, on that, just because we're doing some of this work on data privacy, the whole internet mess, and it's broader than Facebook. Like, it's so many other applications. So I don't know if that's something that you've delved into, maybe on a broader context.
Yeah. Well, the big story, I guess, is well, I'm gonna just the men victims. The men victims of human trafficking, about 18% of trafficking victims are men, and so it's not like they're unrepresented. And all of the victims need our care and attention. There's no doubt about it. It's not, and that's the point, I guess, is that it doesn't. Human trafficking can happen to anyone. That's a reality. Now, there's often a vulnerability that's exploited, but that's the case. So it's like, and sometimes a vulnerability isn't what we typically call a vulnerability. So I heard of one case where it was like upper middle class family in Montreal, and their 12-year-old daughter that they thought was going off to school every day. And then her teacher phoned one day and was like, hey, your daughter hasn't been in school for like 2 weeks. And they're like, well, that's weird. So they, like, when she came home, they said, like, well, where have you been? And then she broke down, and they called the cops, and like somebody had been prostituting her for 2 weeks every day while they thought she was at school, right? And so they use the, like, hey, we'll tell your parents, as the vulnerability to maintain control, right? They'll take on something that's that is a perceived vulnerability, right? Like the fact, hey, we'll tell your family, or we'll hurt your sister, or something like that, which isn't like poverty driven whatsoever, right? It's actually the opposite of it, to some degree. So that's a reality. The around Facebook exploiting and social media and the internet in general, this is a ongoing concern. So the largest online sexually explicit platform is Pornhub. We have the notoriety of hosting that company in Canada, in Montreal, and that is.
You've had some recent successes with them, have you not?
Yeah. So back when I started M47 way back in 2015-16, I'd never heard of a company called Pornhub, but since then they've really showed up on my radar, and they are the single largest internet porn company. Their mother, like their umbrella company, is called MindGeek, and they run these explicit sites all over the world. But they're kind of the biggest thing, and if you could take them down, you'd clean up a lot of the mess. Probably for a short time, because probably somebody else will move in, but at this point. And so we've been calling for them to enforce meaningful age verification, saying like, hey, you're allowing kids onto your site. There's no real filter to keep children off their site. And then the other thing is just their content is often, it's not the depiction of rape, it is actual rape being filmed. There's also cases where it's completely non-consensual content. So there was a case of somebody was filming through the window at a Good Life Fitness gym in Toronto, women working out, and then posting that on Pornhub. And then these women would have to demand that it be taken down. So there's kind of like the two sides of the screen when it comes to Pornhub. It's the kids looking at it from this side of the screen, and then there's also the content that appears on their site. And Pornhub was doing nothing to verify the age or consent of the folks depicted in the films. And so that was we've been writing steadily to the Prime Minister, like, to do something, like enforce the law basically in this, and then just saying like, hey, here are some of the terms, like some of this stuff is incredibly racist. Why is this not why is this up? Why isn't this being prosecuted? And so that probably for the last 4 years we've been pushing on that, but it's suddenly in November, the New York Times picked that up, and they had a story called "The Children of Pornhub," which led to Justin Trudeau being questioned about it in his morning press conference, which then the ground suddenly shifted, and suddenly the whole country was aware of this blight on the Canadian landscape and wanting to do something about it. So currently at the Ethics Committee, there is a study going on to the behavior of this company called Pornhub.
Well, great work on it. I want to get back. What are the signs perhaps families should be looking for to help protect their kids? You brought an example of a well-to-do family, the people that you'd least expect to have this problem.
Yeah. Before I do that, Kelly, I think we should concentrate on the vote that's happening right now in the House of Commons. So my phone is blowing up here. Everyone's trying to get a hold of me right now. So we're trying to figure out. We got to vote in the House of Commons on Bill C7, and
the vote's not quite up yet.
The vote's not quite up yet.
No, not quite yet.
Bells are ringing.
Bells are ringing.
Yeah.
So we got a couple minutes before we're up.
Okay, so it must be being read or something right about now, no?
Yeah, it's being read. I can see the speaker on. I've got a TV in the background. He's reading the vote. He's reading the contents of the bill.
So I'll let you know. So why don't you keep going, Arnold?
All right. I'm getting nervous about this because it's an important vote here. All right, so all right, I'm just gonna take this here for a second. Sorry.
Okay. Well, folks, if anyone's wondering what we're talking about, I'll see if I can show up our new. This is our voting app now. Instead of voting by Zoom in the House of Commons, which would sometimes take 1 hour per vote, some days we'll have 6 votes. And what would happen would take 6 hours to get through the votes, voting by Zoom, and it would actually basically destroy the entire day's process, our ability to look at legislation, debate legislation. So the House of Commons has come up with a system where we take a picture of our face through a voting app, and we can vote yes or no and abstain through that way. Today we've got 2 votes on assisted dying. The first vote is a conservative amendment to take out coverage for assisted dying for those suffering from mental health issues. So that's the first vote. And then the second vote is on the entire bill itself. So that's coming, any moment now.
Yeah, and Kelly, we should talk about it. And the issue was that the piece of legislation went to the Senate, and the Senate made revisions to the bill, adding mental health as a potentially you could ask for assisted suicide through the bill. And so now that the amendment is to remove that portion of it, but there's still been significant issue. And I don't know about your constituency, Kelly, but certainly in mine, I've heard quite an outpouring of concern from particularly persons with disabilities and people representing persons with disabilities about this bill and their grave concerns about how far it goes and how it treats persons with disabilities. I don't know if you've been hearing the same thing.
No, we've heard the same. It creates almost it almost creates a second-class citizenship for the disabled. It takes away a lot of the protections from the previous assisted dying bill, whether it's a second witness, whether it's a kind of a second thought process, a delay so that you could, change your mind. This speeds up the process. What's the worst part about this bill that came back? It's not what the courts had recommended, and it's not what the House of Commons recommended, elected representatives. It's the unelected Senate stacked with Trudeau appointees who have decided to extend it to those suffering mental health issues. A big part of what we're hearing is we need more support for people with mental health. We need more palliative care and more support before we start offering the route of assisted suicide for people with mental health, especially as we're going through COVID and coming out of COVID. We're going to see, I believe, a tsunami of problems of depression, anxiety, and other issues. And this is when we need more protection, not a unelected Senate-driven, easier access.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it goes to the Senate, and there are these major revisions, and it's being pushed to a vote quickly, where there's been no opportunity to study the revisions that have been made by the Senate in committee, and so it just contravenes the whole intent of why all of us went to Ottawa to try and represent the citizens, that we have an opportunity to study and debate and try and get it right.
Arnold, are you back? Are you muted?
I am back here. I was muted.
We're almost at the end of our hour, so why don't I get to maybe just follow up just about what average Canadians can do, but also what signs to look for so we can protect vulnerable youth, vulnerable women, and especially with the Indigenous. And we'll wrap it up, and then we'll go vote.
Okay, that sounds good. So there's many things that you can do. The first thing is talk to your kids. Like, if strangers are talking to them over the internet, if somebody's sending them gifts and pretending to be really friendly with them, but the age difference is way big and things like that, just be aware of that. Be aware. Look out for new things that are showing up that you don't know about, right? New clothing. That's often a big indicator that, hey, they're getting expensive stuff from somebody that you don't know about. That's likely because what typically happens is there's a improvement, or a whole bunch of gifts are given to a young girl in particular, and she thinks it's her boyfriend and things like that, and then suddenly that debt will be called in. It'll be like, well, I gave you all these things, but now I need to get it paid for. You should do this, you should do that. So
okay. And if people are in trouble, where should they go? 911, is there?
So there's a national hotline. You can Google it, the National Hotline, Human Trafficking Hotline. That's something that we should definitely, folks should definitely know about. You can just Google it; it'll come up quickly. That's the good start. But yeah, if you don't know if you suspect something and you don't know what the national hotline is, call 911. They'll get you into the right place, no doubt. Do not be afraid to call the police if you suspect something. The best story I have about that is it was little East Indian doctor. She was at her clinic there, and it was like towards the end of the day, and big burly dude and this 15-year-old girl show up there, and she needed a renewal of her prescription. And so she's like, oh, I have to do a, she's like, all the alarm bells were going off. And so she said, well, I have to do like an inspection or something like that. So she said to the girl to come into the back room, and she's like, that guy's not your boyfriend, is he? And she wouldn't say anything. And then the little East Indian doctor, she's like, the guy was at least twice the size of me. She went out there and she told him to get all the girl's stuff out of his car and bring it in here. And she called the cops. So that's an excellent case of like doing the right thing, right? If you suspect something. And yeah, sure enough, that girl was totally being trafficked. But it was just like, it seemed suspicious. It seemed out to lunch, and it's more than likely it is if you suspect it. So that was a day where it ended well. But yeah, if you see something, say something.
Well, I just want to read, there was one comment here, Arnold, you're a hero.
Yeah. Hey.
You are. Thank you so much for everything you're doing on this. You have moved mountains almost by yourself against a federal government that doesn't seem to care very much about this. Thank you so much for everything you're doing for the victims, and also to prevent future people being victimized. So Arnold, thanks very much. You are a hero. And thanks for spending time with us today. Yeah,
Arnold, yeoman's effort, people don't realize some of the hard work that goes into this, because everybody probably thinks that, what are those guys doing in Ottawa? You're an example of someone that's actually doing something, kicking butt on a very important issue. So kudos to you. Thanks, Arnold.
Yeah, well, thank you, gentlemen. We all have our role to play. And I'm always a little bit jealous on how well Kelly understands the procurement that we do in this country. He's always telling me about some outrageous thing that the Liberals are buying. So we all do our part, and it's an honor and privilege to work beside you guys.
Yeah. James, thanks for joining us today. Anyone who's watching, if you want to chat about this, you can contact my office, James' office, Arnold's office. And then James and I, we've been meeting with the police chief. Edmonton's blessed with a phenomenal police chief, Chief McPhee. And we've been meeting a lot on opioid issues, crime issues. The city does work through Zebra Child Protection, but we'll see if we can get Chief McPhee or one of his representatives to do an event like this, so we can chat a bit more about how we can help protect Edmontonians and others.
It's a great idea.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Great.
We've got about 5 minutes left to go vote. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Right. Thank
Arnold,
you.
thank you again. James, thanks a lot.
All right. Make sure you guys vote yay on this one, eh?
Yes. The first one only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, guys. Good night.